It was the kind of moment that stops you mid-swing. A quiet Tuesday afternoon at Muirfield Village, the kind of place where the ghosts of golf's greatest champions still linger in the shadows of the Ohio pines. Jack Nicklaus, the Golden Bear, the man who holds 18 major championships in his iron grip, stepped to the microphone. He was supposed to talk about the Memorial Tournament, the event he built with his own hands. Instead, he delivered a sucker punch heard around the world of sports with a calm, deliberate cadence of a man who has seen it all. He turned his fire on the new face of the PGA Tour, a powerful outsider brought in to drag professional golf into the future. But this outsider wasn't a player. He wasn't even a golfer. He was a media mogul from the NFL, and he had just been publicly challenged by the game's ultimate king. This is the story of a collision between tradition and modernization, a confrontation that has left the golf world holding its breath. A story about power, legacy, and the soul of a sport that finds itself at a crossroads. This is the story of the shot that Nicklaus fired at Brian Rolapp. The air at Muirfield Village Golf Club is always thick with history. Every blade of grass feels like it was manicured for the legends of the game. And on this day in June 2026, the man who built it all was about to make headlines that had nothing to do with the tournament itself. Jack Nicklaus, the 18-time major winner and the tournament host, was visibly conflicted as he faced the media ahead of the Memorial Tournament. He began his response cautiously, stating, "I don't want to comment on the tour's schedule because I'm not exactly in favor of what they're doing right now." But the restraint was fleeting, a gentleman's courtesy before the store within moments. The Golden Bear dropped his diplomatic guard and delivered a blistering critique of the PGA Tour's future plans being spearheaded by the newly installed CEO, Brian Rolapp. Rolapp, a powerful executive poach from the NFL, was just starting to make his mark on the organization, and Nicklaus wasn't impressed. "I hate to see tournaments bunched too much together with too many big tournaments too close together," Nicklaus said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. "That's a problem, I think. And I think that's going to be a problem for the tour in the future." He was speaking about Rolapp's proposed schedule compression, a radical idea designed to streamline the season, but one that Nicklaus saw as a fundamental threat to the integrity of the competition. Nicklaus didn't just offer a vague opinion. He named specific tournaments that he believed were being sacrificed under the new regime. He pointed to the Cognizant Classic, a tournament he personally supports, and laid out its impossible position. "If you looked at the schedule, we're involved in the Cognizant down in Florida, and, we have Pebble Beach in Los Angeles, Tiger's event, and then Cognizant. And then we had Bay Hill and the Players," he explained, the frustration evident in his tone. The implication was clear. How could a smaller tournament survive when the calendar was crammed with giants? I mean, what chance does that tournament have? It sits right in the middle of those. They don't have a chance. It was a brutal public attack on the very foundation of Rolapp's strategic vision. Nicklaus, the master of course management, was arguing that the new CEO was failing to manage the calendar, risking player burnout and diluting the fields of smaller, historically significant events. The 86-year-old legend even lamented his own outburst, acknowledging the potential repercussions with a wry smile. "I probably shouldn't have brought it up here. I'll get chastised for that later." But the damage was done. He wasn't just questioning a schedule. He was questioning the leadership of a man brought in to revolutionize his tour. Nicklaus concluded with a stark warning that hung in the air like a 20-foot putt on a Sunday at Augusta. "I don't think it's a problem yet, but I think it will be if we don't address it." It was a shot across the bow, an open declaration that the most powerful voice in golf was bracing for a fight. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown between a legendary past and a corporate future. To understand the collision course between Jack Nicklaus and Brian Rolapp, you have to go back to the moment the PGA Tour made a decision that would change everything. In the summer of 2025, the tour announced that Brian Rolapp, a 53-year-old media executive with no background in professional golf, would become its new CEO. The announcement sent shockwaves through the sport. This wasn't a former player. This wasn't a lifelong golf administrator. This was a man who had spent more than 2 decades inside the corporate machine of the National Football League. The search committee that selected Rolapp was a who's who of golf power. Tiger Woods sat on that committee. Adam Scott, one of the most respected voices in the locker room, was there too. So was Arthur Blank, the billionaire owner of the Atlanta Falcons and a longtime PGA Tour insider. They had spent months searching for the right person to lead the tour into its next phase, and they landed on Rolapp because they believed he had something the sport desperately needed: a fresh perspective, a vision that could compete with the modern sports landscape. Rolapp came with an impressive resume. He had risen through the ranks of the NFL to become its chief media and business officer. Under his watch, the league had secured blockbuster media deals with Amazon, Netflix, and YouTube. He had helped launch NFL Plus, the league's streaming platform. He was a Harvard Business School graduate who had been named to the Sports Business Journal's 40 Under 40 Hall of Fame. In the world of sports media and commercial strategy, there were few people more accomplished. But there was one thing Rolapp was not. He was not a golfer. He was not one of the guys. And that fact alone was going to create friction. In his first public comments as CEO, Rolapp made it clear he wasn't coming to the tour to be bound by tradition. He spoke about bringing a relentless focus to the job. He talked about the need to create a more cohesive schedule, a simpler points system, and a structure where the best players compete against each other more frequently. He was borrowing from the NFL playbook. The NFL had become a juggernaut by making every game matter, by creating scarcity, by forcing fans to watch because they never knew when their team might play next. Rolapp wanted to bring that same urgency to golf. He wanted to compress the season into roughly 6 months, from late January to early September. He wanted to create a two-tier system where players would have to earn their way into the top events through performance. The vision was bold, but it also threatened the very fabric of what Jack Nicklaus had spent a lifetime building. Nicklaus was 86 years old when Rolapp was announced. He had been the face of the PGA Tour for decades. He had helped shape it, nurture it, protect it. He had turned down a massive offer to lead the rival LIV Golf League because he believed in the tour's mission. The man was golf royalty, and now he was watching an outsider come in and reshape the sport without consulting him. It was a recipe for confrontation. That Rolapp's plan included the idea of relegation, where players who didn't perform would drop to a lower tier of events. He talked about taking events to new markets, including media markets where the tour had little presence. He wanted to double the number of signature events, packing the calendar with big money tournaments that would attract the world's best players. On paper, it sounded exciting. More big events, more drama, more at stake. But Jack Nicklaus saw things differently. He had been a player when the schedule was more balanced, when tournaments had room to breathe, when smaller events could actually survive and thrive. He knew that a player's body had limits. He knew that burnout was real. He knew that if you packed too many big tournaments too close together, the fans would get tired, the players would get exhausted, and the smaller tournaments would get crushed. He saw Rolapp's vision as a threat to everything he had helped build. The two men were scheduled to meet at the Memorial Tournament that week. Nicklaus had made it clear he wanted to sit down with Rolapp and outgoing Commissioner Jay Monahan to have a conversation about the future. He was hoping for a dialogue. But what he got was a public confrontation that would echo through the sport for years to come. Behind the scenes at Muirfield Village, the conversation everyone was waiting for finally happened. Jack Nicklaus and Brian Rolapp sat down face to face. The Golden Bear and the Outsider. A meeting that would define the direction of professional golf for a generation. While the details of that private conversation remained behind closed doors, what happened in the days surrounding it painted a vivid picture of the tensions at play. Nicklaus had made his position crystal clear. He hated what he was seeing. He told the media he wanted to sit down with Rolapp and outgoing Commissioner Jay Monahan to express his concerns. The 86-year-old legend wasn't pulling any punches. He had spent a half-century crafting the Memorial Tournament into one of the most prestigious events in golf, and he was watching the tour's new leadership propose changes that threatened everything he had built. Rolapp, for his part, came to the memorial with a message of his own. He met with reporters and laid out the rationale behind his radical vision. He defended the two-tier system, explaining that there was strong demand from sponsors for both tiers of events. He spoke about creating more interesting and competitive structures that would serve the tour well into the future, but the tension was unmistakable. Dan Rappaport, a respected golf journalist, captured the awkwardness of the moment perfectly. It's got to be hard for Brian Rolapp, a guy who comes from outside of golf, to hear Jack Nicklaus say this stuff, Rappaport observed. He predicted the conversation between the two men would be uncomfortable, with Rolapp forced to explain that the PGA Tour, as Nicklaus knew, it was not the PGA Tour of tomorrow. The generational divide was stark. Rolapp had been brought in specifically because he wasn't bound by golf's traditions. He was a businessman who had helped turn the NFL into a media juggernaut. He saw the PGA Tour through a different lens entirely. Nicklaus, on the other hand, was the embodiment of those traditions. He had helped create the modern PGA Tour in 1968 when the players broke away to form their own organization. He had been there for every major decision, every pivotal moment. Now, at 86, he was watching a newcomer with no golf pedigree reshape his life's work. The numbers told the story of how far the tour had come. The Memorial Tournament, once a crown jewel between the Masters and U.S. Open, was now one of 9 tournaments with $20 million purses. Rolapp wanted even more. He envisioned doubling the number of signature events, creating a season with 21 to 26 elevated tournaments. It was a radical departure from the more balanced schedule Nicklaus had known as a player, and the players were watching closely. Maverick McNeely, who sat on the Future Competition Committee, revealed that the biggest issue players raised privately with Rolapp was the ability to build their own schedules. They wanted flexibility, the freedom to rest when they needed it. Nicklaus had made the same point publicly. "I look at it from the way I was as a player," Nicklaus said. "I could play a couple weeks in a row, maybe 3 weeks in a row, but I needed some time off to be able to recharge the batteries." Rolapp tried to address those concerns diplomatically. He insisted players would not be forced to play in every event. But his vision was clear. He wanted to create a schedule so compelling, so packed with high-stakes tournaments, that players would want to participate more often. It was a subtle but important distinction. He wasn't mandating participation. He was engineering the calendar to make skipping events feel like a competitive disadvantage. The clash was deeply personal for Nicklaus. He wasn't just a retired player offering opinions from the sidelines. He was the founder of the Memorial Tournament, an event he had nurtured for half a century. When he looked at the proposed changes, he saw a threat to that legacy. He had moved the tournament to the week before the U.S. Open at the tour's request, a decision he didn't like. A year later, it was back in its traditional spot. Now, he was watching a new set of changes that could put smaller events like his own tournament in jeopardy. "We have Pebble Beach in Los Angeles, Tiger's event, and then Cognizant, and then we had Bay Hill and the Players," Nicklaus lamented. "I mean, what chance does that tournament have?" He was speaking about the Cognizant Classic, but the fear applied to any tournament caught in the crossfire of the tour's expansion plans. The smaller events, the ones without the prestige or the massive purses, they were the ones that would suffer. Rolapp's response to all of this was measured but firm. He had the backing of the policy board, the support of key players, and a clear mandate from the business side of the tour. The changes were coming. The question was whether Nicklaus could influence the final shape of those changes or whether he would be left on the outside looking in. The meeting between them was the turning point, the moment when the future of the PGA Tour hung in the balance. The meeting at Muirfield Village was supposed to be the starting point for a constructive dialogue between two powerful men with competing visions. Instead, it became the epicenter of a seismic shift in professional golf. What happened in the days that followed the meeting revealed just how deep the divisions ran, and how quickly the sport was moving toward a transformation that would reshape everything Jack Nicklaus had helped build. The confrontation generated waves of reaction throughout the golf world, and it didn't take long for other voices to join the Golden Bears chorus of concern. Less than 2 weeks after Nicklaus fired his warning shot, Rory McIlroy, the sport's most influential active player and its unofficial spokesperson during the LIV Golf wars, stepped to the microphone at the U.S. Open and delivered his own brutal assessment of Rolapp's plans. McIlroy didn't hold back. He called Rolapp's proposed Track 2 system, the lower tier of professional golf under the new structure, a glorified Corn Ferry event, a damning comparison that suggested the second tier would be little more than a glorified minor league. He warned that historic tournaments like the Canadian Open would lose their stature if sponsors couldn't pony up the massive sums required to stay on the top track. It was a stunning rebuke from the sport's biggest star, one that echoed Nicklaus's concerns about the fate of smaller events and validated the legend's fears. But the most telling moment from McIlroy's press conference came when he reflected on the entire path the tour had traveled. "I think, as they've done all this work, You start to realize that the way the tour was before LIV came along was actually pretty good, McIlroy said. It was a pretty good structure, and everything sort of worked pretty well. He pointed directly to the LIV Golf threat as the catalyst for the upheaval, arguing that the Saudi-backed league had created a false economy that forced the tour to raise purses and chase top players with lucrative incentives. Now that LIV looks like it's less of a threat, he concluded, the old ways of the PGA Tour weren't actually that bad. It was a remarkable admission from a player who had been at the center of the tour's defense against LIV, and it added a powerful new dimension to Nicklaus's argument. The players had already been speaking with their feet. The 2026 schedule had created a congested stretch of 5 significant tournaments in 6 weeks, including 3 signature events bookended by the Masters and PGA Championship. The result was predictable. 5 of the top 15 players in the world skipped the Cadillac Championship, with world number 2 Rory McIlroy leading the exodus. Scottie Scheffler, the world number 1, admitted he was whipped after the Memorial Tournament and couldn't perform at the U.S. Open the following week. Justin Rose withdrew from the RBC Heritage after a heartbreaking Masters finish, confessing, "I looked at this period coming up and I think something had to give." The players were physically exhausted, mentally drained, and making difficult choices about which events to skip. It was exactly the scenario Nicklaus had warned about. The players were also raising deeper concerns about the structure itself. Tommy Fleetwood, the world number 7, voiced his anxiety about the toll the condensed schedule would take on players' bodies, pointing to the increased risk of injury when the season is compressed. "I think niggles start to happen in the body and stuff like that," he said. "I think mentally it can have its strains." Justin Thomas spoke about the impossibility of playing at a high level in more than 3 consecutive weeks, reinforcing Nicklaus's argument about player burnout. The consensus among the players was clear. They wanted flexibility, they wanted time to rest, and they were worried that Rolapp's vision was prioritizing commercial success over their well-being. And then there were the sponsors. Tournament organizers who were bracing for a second-tier designation were asking the obvious question: why would they commit substantial prize money to what amounted to a feeder league? Media partners were demanding clarity on what they were paying for under their current deals. The corporate support that had made the PGA Tour so wealthy was suddenly looking shaky. But perhaps the most revealing moment came when Lucas Glover, the chairman of the Players Advisory Council, stepped forward to defend the changes. In a video released by the PGA Tour, Glover acknowledged that change is always difficult, but insisted the tour was heading in the right direction. He admitted there were still details to be ironed out, but argued that laying the foundation early was crucial. It was a carefully worded defense, one that tried to strike a balance between acknowledging concerns and projecting confidence in the process. But Glover's willingness to speak publicly at all was telling. The tour's leadership needed a friendly voice to push back against the growing chorus of criticism, and Glover was the one who stepped up. The division among the players was becoming increasingly apparent. Billy Horschel supported the move to eliminate sponsor exemptions from the top tier, arguing that a merit-based system would be easier for everyone. But others were deeply skeptical. Nick Taylor bluntly said it would certainly suck to get stuck in a situation where he couldn't play his National Open because of the new structure. The cracks in the tour's unity were starting to show. Through it all, Jack Nicklaus remained the central figure, the aging lion who had roared and refused to back down. He had sat down with Rolapp, delivered his message, and then watched as the sport he helped build began to fracture under the weight of the new CEO's vision. The meeting hadn't resolved anything. It had only made the divisions more public, more visceral, and more entrenched. And now, with the entire golf world watching, the stage was set for the next phase of this battle. As the dust settled from Nicklaus's opening salvo, a new voice emerged from the locker room that would fundamentally shift the narrative. Rory McIlroy, the world number 2 and the sport's most influential active player, stepped to the microphone at the U.S. Open in June 2026 and delivered a verdict that echoed the Golden Bear's concerns with devastating precision. McIlroy's critique cut straight to the heart of Rolapp's proposed 2-tier system. He warned that the lower track 2 events, designed as a feeder circuit for the elite tournaments, would be little more than glorified Korn Ferry events. The comparison was damning. The Korn Ferry Tour is professional golf's developmental minor league, the place where young players grind for years hoping to earn their PGA Tour cards. McIlroy was saying that under Rolapp's plan, historic tournaments with decades of tradition would be relegated to minor league status. He specifically called out the Canadian Open, a tournament that has been played since 1904 and is the PGA Tour's only regular stop in Canada. McIlroy, a two-time winner of the event, but McIlroy's most revealing moment came when he reflected on how the sport had arrived at this crossroads. He admitted that the PGA Tour's response to LIV Golf had created a false economy. The threat of the Saudi-backed league had forced the tour to inflate prize funds, cut fields, and chase top players with lucrative incentives. It was a reaction, a desperate defense mechanism. And now that LIV's threat was fading, with Saudi Arabia's public investment fund reportedly planning to cease funding after the 2026 season, McIlroy wondered aloud why the tour was still racing towards such radical change. You start to realize that the way the tour was before LIV came along was actually pretty good, McIlroy said. He spoke those words with the weariness of a man who had spent years defending the tour against its rivals, only to watch the organization dismantle its own foundation. It was a pretty good structure, and everything sort of worked pretty well. The irony was impossible to ignore. The tour had responded to an external threat by promising a transformation that would safeguard its future. But in doing so, it had created a system that threatened the very things that made it special. The historic tournaments, the player-friendly schedule, the merit-based competition. All of it was being sacrificed in the name of modernization. McIlroy was no longer on the policy board. He had resigned his position in 2023, stepping back from the rooms where these decisions were being made. He made it clear he wasn't part of the process anymore. But his words still carried weight. He was the world number 2, a 6-time major winner, the man who had become the de facto face of the tour during the LIV wars. When he spoke, people listened. His critique validated everything Jack Nicklaus had said weeks earlier. The Golden Bear had warned about the dangers of cramming too many big tournaments together. McIlroy was warning about the dangers of creating a two-tier system that would relegate historic events to minor league status. Two generations of golf royalty, united in their concern about the direction of the sport. The players were speaking with their actions, too. Scottie Scheffler, the world number 1, admitted he was whipped after the Memorial Tournament and couldn't perform at the U.S. Open the following week. Justin Rose withdrew from the RBC Heritage after an emotionally draining Masters, confessing that something had to give. Justin Thomas echoed the sentiment, saying it was brutally tough to play in more than 3 consecutive weeks. The players were voting with their feet, skipping events, and telling anyone who would listen that the current structure was unsustainable. And now, with the PGA Tour board set to meet in Hartford to vote on the proposed changes, the pressure was mounting on Brian Rolapp to find a solution that could bridge the divide. The board was scheduled to meet on June 22, 2026, with Rolapp expected to address the public the following day. The decisions made in that room would shape the future of professional golf for a generation. And everyone from the Golden Bear to the world's best players was watching, waiting, and wondering if the sport they loved was about to change forever.